The ongoing strife in Poland occasionally forced Russian troops to pursue the insurgents across borders, and one such incident now sparked the Turco-Russian War. The Zaporizhian Cossacks, ferocious defenders of orthodoxy and known for their opposition to both Polish and Russian overlords, chased a retreating Polish militia into Ottoman territory, burning the town of Balta and killing all its inhabitants. This cross-border violation was sufficient pretext to trigger an Ottoman response. Already under pressure from France and Austria, the Ottoman Sultan arrested the Russian ambassador in Istanbul, and war soon followed. Both sides began mobilizing along the border. The Ottomans struck first, launching their campaign in early 1769, targeting the Ukraine with incursions orchestrated to capture tens of thousands of peasants, which were transported for sale in Crimea's slave markets. These slave raids had been a well-established Muslim practice for hundreds of years, and were the main reason for such a sparse population in an otherwise richly fertile region. But this time, the Russians, under General Rumyantsev, struck back decisively, beginning with a victory at the Battle of Kotin, where an entire Ottoman Janissary corps was routed, suffering massive losses. The Russians then pushed into Moldavia, capturing its capital Jassy, advancing soon after into Wallachia, securing Bucharest by November. The war's pivotal battle occurred at Kargul in July of 1770, where Rumyantsev, commanding a smaller force, decisively defeated a much larger Ottoman army. Russian casualties were minimal, around 1,000, compared to 20,000 to 50,000 Ottoman soldiers, many of them drowning in the Danube while fleeing. This astonishing victory sent shockwaves throughout the Ottoman ranks and established Rumyantsev's reputation as a brilliant commander. Meanwhile, the front extended all the way to the Caucasus, where Georgian and Cossack forces supported Russian defences, repelling much larger Ottoman contingents. Catherine, always thinking big, had grander ambitions still. She appointed Count Alexei Orlov as admiral of a newly refitted Baltic fleet. Orlov's mission was audacious: to sail all the way around Europe and into the Mediterranean, harass Ottoman forces, and support Greek insurgents in the Aegean, with the ultimate aim of perhaps taking Istanbul and linking up with the army via the Black Sea. In a show of naval ambition, Catherine now sought help from Britain and Denmark. The British agreed to supply them with crew and equipment. They even seconded 3 of their top admirals, Elphinstone, Grieg, and Sir Charles Knowles, who commanded part of the Russian fleet. The navy embarked in September of 1769, eventually sailing through the Straits of Gibraltar and onwards to the Aegean, where it soon found itself facing a much larger Ottoman fleet. With a complete lack of naval experience, Orlov leaned heavily on his British commanders. At the Battle of Chios, they outmaneuvered the Ottomans, forcing them to retreat to Chesme Bay. The Russians now blockaded the bay and, with the use of fireships, completely obliterated the entire Ottoman fleet. The news stunned Europe. Russia, till now only ever a nation of landlubbers, had just sailed all the way around Europe and destroyed the cream of the Turkish navy in a single decisive blow. The Russian navy were minnows no more. Though the naval campaign was a spectacular success, the plan to penetrate the Dardanelles and seize Istanbul was too ambitious. Instead, the Russian fleet bombarded Ottoman ports from Alexandria in Egypt all the way to Beirut in Lebanon, creating chaos and unrest, but without much strategic gain. In any case, these stunning Russian victories now frightened even the trigger-happy Frederick over in Prussia. He knew full well that if the Russians took any more territory from the Turks, it would set off revolutions across the entire Balkan Peninsula and compel Austria to act against Russia, which he had just bound himself to defend. So Frederick, in cahoots with mortal rivals Austria, despite his deal with Catherine, nevertheless sent a joint diplomatic mission to St. Petersburg to convince her to come to terms with the Ottomans and relinquish her territorial gains there. The trade-off would be a carving up of Poland between the three of them. Catherine, frustrated but ever the pragmatist, consented. So it was that the partition of Poland in 1772 saw the Commonwealth lose about a third of both its territory and population. Prussia gained control of key Baltic trade ports. Austria took Galicia, rich in agriculture and salt mines, while Russia claimed a vast but economically poorer eastern lands. The once mighty Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had now been reduced to a shadow of its former self. Worse was to come for the poor old Poles, but we're getting just a little ahead of ourselves. Despite the partition of Poland, Catherine's ambitions in the Ottoman Empire were far from over, and fortunately for her, the Ottomans were still reluctant to negotiate a complete settlement, despite pressure, now in the opposite direction, from the irritating French and Austrians. By 1773, Russian forces under the enigmatic general Alexander Suvorov had achieved several more stunning victories over the attacking Ottomans. At Kirsova, Suvorov's 3,000 men completely routed a 12,000-strong Ottoman force, and at Kosluja he smashed through Turkish lines and stormed their headquarters during a heavy rainstorm with another much smaller force. In fierce bayonet fighting, his troops routed the entire 40,000-strong Ottoman army. These unbelievable triumphs finally brought the Ottomans to the negotiating table. In 1774, the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca was signed, marking one of the most humiliating defeats ever for the Ottoman Empire. This catastrophe finally forced the Sultan to accept Russian terms for peace, which were substantial, including the complete independence of the Crimean Khanate from Ottoman overlordship, Russian access to the Black Sea from Azov, as well as free access through the Bosporus into the Mediterranean. The acknowledgement of Russia as protector of all Orthodox Christians, significant war reparations, and several minor territories throughout the Ukraine and the Caucasus, which would be given to both Russia and Austria. It was a major diplomatic and territorial victory for Russia, though it further strained the empire's resources. Following the first partition of Poland in 1772, a significant Jewish population came under Russian rule. The legendary General Count Grigory Potemkin was granted estates in regions with dense Jewish communities. Unlike the prevalent anti-Semitism of the time, he was intrigued by Jewish culture, befriending rabbis who became his personal advisors. He advocated on behalf of Jewish communities across the empire, and while other courtiers partied, he would often be found, late in the evenings, engaging in deep discussions with them on questions of religious law. As Potemkin grew closer to Catherine, his deep interest in theology and culture inspired a revival of an old Russian dream, the Greek project, This ambitious plan aimed to liberate the lands of the former Byzantine Empire, including Constantinople, from Ottoman control. The idea was to position Russia as the protector of orthodoxy and potentially restore the Eastern Roman Empire. Potemkin firmly believed it was Russia's destiny, under Catherine's leadership, to reclaim these territories and even extend their influence as far as Jerusalem. He primarily focused his efforts on the south, particularly the vast regions of Ukraine and Crimea, making their acquisition his personal mission. He even went so far as establishing a cavalry unit composed entirely of Jewish soldiers, to be named the Israelovsky Regiment, the first Jewish military force since the fall of Jerusalem to the ancient Romans. This regiment operated alongside Ukrainian Cossacks, symbolizing a union of diverse groups under Russian leadership. The Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca, signed in 1774, if you recall, had granted Russia significant concessions at the expense of the Ottoman Empire. Perhaps the most significant was relinquishing its suzerainty over the Crimean Khanate, who were granted independence by the Ottomans. A similar concession was also made in the Bessarabian river valleys, as well as Moldavia and Wallachia, in which Russia had returned recently conquered territories, but under the agreement retained the right to intervene if the region became unstable. Obviously, this played into Catherine's hands because if those regions should unfortunately succumb to some unforeseeable political anarchy, Russia was poised to march its troops straight in and quell the disturbance to restore law and order. How convenient. Of course, that's precisely what happened. A succession of local Khans fought among themselves for control of the Crimea, one of whom, Shahin Giray, a progressive reformist, was a regular visitor to Catherine's court in St. Petersburg. It wasn't long before Giray, with the aid of Russian troops, was installed as Khan. But a series of revolts against his Eurocentric reform program saw the region descend into civil war, forcing Giray to flee. The Ottomans were in no position to meddle and stayed mostly out of it, as Catherine dispatched Potemkin to restore order, marching troops in and returning Giray to the throne while he was at it. However, the growing Russian military presence and the influx of Christian Greek settlers eroded Giray's authority, leading to his abdication and the outright annexation of Crimea by Russia in 1783. Jackpot. With this annexation of Crimea, Catherine and Potemkin turned their attention to colonizing the southern Ukrainian steppe, now also part of the expanding Russian Empire. Due to incessant Muslim raiding, the area, as mentioned previously, was sparsely populated, so the Russian government introduced incentives for settlers, including land grants, tax exemptions and subsidies, drawing immigrants from far and wide, controversially even including Catholics and Jews. Even British convicts, who had been destined for Australia, were rerouted to help populate the region. The area, to be known as Novorossiya, or New Russia, flourished under these policies, with its population doubling within just 2 years. Potemkin's vision extended far beyond mere settlement. He soon began building key infrastructure, starting with the strategic port city of Kherson on the Dnieper River, which soon took on construction of Russia's new Black Sea Fleet. Another key development was the establishment of Sevastopol, a deep-water port that would become the home of Russia's new powerful navy. Potemkin's urban projects also included founding new cities such as Nikolaev, Mariupol, and Yekaterinoslav, now called Dnipro, which were all designed to secure Russia's hold on the Black Sea and reinforce its southern expansion. In 1786, eager to showcase his achievements and further impress the court and international observers, Potemkin organized a grand tour for Catherine, also inviting an entourage of European dignitaries, including Austrian Emperor Joseph II. The journey, known for its elaborate luxury and carefully staged displays of Russian power and prosperity, was intended to project an image of the Russian Empire as a modern and thriving state. The caravan travelled onward through Ukraine and Crimea, where Catherine witnessed the construction of new cities, fortifications, and the Black Sea fleet assembled at Sevastopol. At each stop, Potemkin arranged military parades, feasts, and other spectacles to highlight his successes. Standing on the Inkerman Hill and looking down upon Potemkin's great project of Sevastopol, with 40 ships of the line built literally from scratch by his carpenters, Catherine gasped in astonishment and immediately thought of the great Russian builder Peter the Great, whose dream, it seems, was now within her grasp to fulfill. The tour was immensely successful in impressing both Russian and foreign dignitaries. The Ottoman Empire, alarmed by Russian expansion, and now very public advertising of the Greek project, saw these Russian displays of power as direct provocation. The Turkish government, already agitated by Russian meddling in its Balkan Christian territories, felt compelled to act. By 1787, once again under pressure, but this time from Britain, France, and Prussia, the Ottoman Sultan again declared war. Attempting to seize the initiative, the Ottomans sent an amphibious invasion to the mouth of the Dnieper River, laying siege to the fortresses on the Kinburn Peninsula at its mouth. But the Turks, numbering over 5,000 men, and with 25 warships providing artillery support, failed to dislodge General Suvorov, who just happened to be in town. His garrison of 1,500 troops, despite being heavily outnumbered and vastly outgunned, launched a number of brazen counterattacks and sorties from their fortress, inflicting significant casualties on the attackers. General Suvorov himself typically led from the front and had 2 horses shot out from under him, and was later wounded in the face and hand. But as the fighting raged on, a regiment of Cossacks arrived to reinforce the defenders, outflanking the enemy and forcing them to retreat in disarray. Canister shot from repositioned Russian batteries further decimated the Turkish lines when they were finally in range. This ignominious defeat was a harbinger of things to come for the Ottomans, while General Suvorov was once again decorated as a hero. In Moldavia, an Ottoman vassal state, Russian troops under General Rumyantsev pressed in and retook Kotin as they had done just a few years earlier, following soon after with the capture of the capital city of Jassy. Potemkin himself also led an assault on the fortress of Ochakov, which resulted in enormous losses on both sides, but a decisive victory nevertheless for the Russians. By August of 1789, a combined Austrian-Russian army, led by General Suvorov and Austrian Prince Josias of Coburg, though again heavily outnumbered, completely routed an entire Ottoman army at Fochani, forcing the Turks out of Moldavia altogether. And this success was followed up in September by a stunning victory at Rymnik, where 25,000 Austro-Russian soldiers took on 100,000 Ottoman troops, raised by the Grand Vizier himself. A fearful host containing 40,000 elite Janissaries and 40,000 professional Sipahi and Delhi cavalry. The Allies, despite being outnumbered 4-1, nevertheless advanced on the enemy and, in numerous engagements, regularly inflicted casualties at a rate of 20-1, before unleashing their own hussars that caused the complete disintegration of the Ottoman army, with Turks fleeing in all directions. The battle, which would become a textbook example of complex maneuvering over rough terrain, once again earned Suvorov international prestige, and both he and Prince Josias of Austria would continue their illustrious careers well into the French Revolutionary Wars of the future. But for now, things were looking grim for the Ottomans. They tried to regain some momentum elsewhere by mounting an offensive over in Croatia. It not only failed completely, but they lost a key fortress at Cetingrad. Even worse, an Austrian army managed to finally conquer the Serbian capital of Belgrade, which had been in Ottoman hands for over 250 years. Back in Bessarabia, Potemkin pushed his own troops into Bender, Akerman, and Kilia, and soon linked up with Suvorov. Revolts broke out all across the Balkans, and General Suvorov now earned himself another stunning victory by laying siege to and eventually storming the old Venetian fortress of Ismail, long held by the Ottomans and thought by everyone to be impregnable. The defenders had been given orders to hold it to the very last man, so when the Russians broke through, ferocious hand-to-hand fighting was conducted, house by house, and in the aftermath, the Russians carried out terrible reprisals on the remaining civilian population. By the end of the assault, not a soul was left alive in the city, and Suvorov was reported to have retired to his tent, weeping. As Russia pummeled the Ottomans in the south, a new threat emerged in the north. Egged on by Britain and Prussia, Sweden too now declared war on Russia, hoping to recapture Finnish territory and destabilize Catherine's regime. The Swedish king hoped to leverage dissatisfaction within Russia, particularly among those sympathetic to Paul, to stage a coup. Though the Swedish fleet posed a significant threat to St. Petersburg, Catherine held her nerve. Her Baltic fleet managed to repel them, and, ironically, internal dissent in Sweden, fueled by Catherine's agents, caused its own nobility to switch sides, almost toppling its own king. Talk about backfire. The conflict with Sweden ended in an abrupt stalemate, but it demonstrated to the entire world Catherine's resilience in the face of both foreign and domestic threats. She proved that she could scheme like the best of them. The Ottoman Empire, eventually exhausted by its continual defeats, was finally forced to the negotiating table. The Treaty of Jassy, signed in 1792, confirmed Russia's dominance over the northern Black Sea region, cementing its annexation of Crimea and granting Russia new territories in Bessarabia. Though Russia returned Ismail and some other cities to the Ottomans in the deal, the treaty clearly marked the end of Ottoman influence in the Crimean Peninsula and significantly expanded Russia's power into the Black Sea. Tens of thousands of Muslims evacuated the region and made their way to Anatolia, in an exodus of biblical proportions.